start recording. Right, so good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to our first official session for AUI 4861. This is one of the most interesting modules at honors level. Similar to your AUI 4862, you would observe that most of the questions that you would come across, especially in your assignment questions or even in the exam, they are centralized on corporate governance. Okay. And in light of that, I just wanted to make sure that I reflect back what you need to know in terms of the topics. So there's about 6 topics to be covered for the purposes of this module. The first one dealing with the International Professional Practice Framework, which is the IPPF. I've already drafted notes for you for that, and that is what we're going to start with in today's session. So just some few outlines that you need to know. Sources of reference for this concept. You just need to look into your IPPF standards. You need to look at the IIA Code of Ethics. You need to be familiar with that. You also need to be familiar with the practice advisory. You also need to be familiar with the implementation guidance. Okay, and also just to add to this, the definition of internal auditing. So these are your key sources of reference to understand the IPPF framework. So in essence, the IPPF framework is made up of these, and study materials, you need to look into your AUI 2601 study guide. It nicely summarizes most of the aforementioned sources of reference as outlined. And another source of reference as well for this, it will be the notes that I'm going to give you, and as well as AUI 3704. You can also use the study guide for that. It nicely paraphrases topic number 1. Okay, so I've just given you guys an outline of what you discover when we get into topic 1, and this is more or less like a refresher of things that you have already been introduced to at your undergraduate degree level. But now at honors level, we need to just quickly do a recap on it, and you will also be tested on this, be it in the assignment. If they don't test it in the assignment, surely you should expect to see it in the examination. So that's how they go around testing you guys on that. And then topic number 2, it deals with the regulatory framework. I'm not going to speak much about the rest of the other topics as yet, but all I'll simply say is that you need to be familiar with the Companies Act, the PFMA, the MFMA. Okay, that's all I would say for now, especially with regards to topic 2. Then in-house, topic number 3 deals with the in-house, outsourced, and post-sourced internal audit activities. Now, one of the key things that they would possibly test you is just the benefits. Or rather, let me put it this way. Pros and cons of outsourcing. Internal audit activities. So these are some of the things you're going to come across in topic number 3. right? I don't want to dwell too much in giving too much detail on the rest of the other topics, but the one I want to dwell a lot on for today, it's topic 1. Then you have topic number 4, which deals with establishment, the administration and management of the internal audit activity. So now this has to do with how the chief audit executive, which is the person responsible for managing the internal audit department of the organization, what are those criteria that he has to satisfy or she has to satisfy in order to be able to manage this department effectively? What are the reports that this individual is expected to generate, and to whom does this individual report to? What type of line of reporting are they in place? All those are very important and key to help you to understand the duties of the chief audit executive when it comes to managing the internal audit activities, right? That's topic number 4. So I'll just simply say CAE and the responsibilities towards the internal audit activity. Okay. And then stakeholder communication, it has to do with the different channel of reporting that the chief audit executive would have to have in place. So there's administrative reporting that he does or she does to the CEO. And then there's another line of reporting that happens with the board, and that is called functional reporting, okay? And then the last one, it deals with marketing the internal audit activity. Now, this has to do with the following. This is now where you get introduced in detail to the Institute of Internal Auditors. So I'm going to talk about that when we come to that part. So without further ado, I want to make sure that today we get into detail with topic number 1. Like I said, gentlemen, this is a topic that you are already familiar with from undergraduate level perspective, but it would just help as a quick refresher for the purposes of this module. Right, so very important, gentlemen, the IPPF framework, it's a framework that is established through the IIA, which is the Institute of Internal Auditors. Now, I just want to quickly show you how we're going to be navigating in this note. It's a very short slide, about 15 pages long, but it's very detailed and it summarizes the IPPF framework in detail. So when you're looking at the IPPF framework, there are what we call elements to it, and the elements can be broken down as follows. Number 1, there is the definition of internal auditing. There is the code of ethics. There is the international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing, and this refers to the IPPF standards. Then there's the core principles for the professional practice of internal auditing, followed by the implementation guidance. All right. And by the way, the implementation guidance, they just elaborate further on the different standards that you find, of course, in the IPPF standards, which is namely the attribute and the performance standards. So your implementation guidance, they give a further elaboration on what those attributes and and performance standards really want to explain. And then there's what we call supplemental guidance. Now, this one, very important, all practice guides, global technology audit guides, and then there's GTA, GS, and guides to the assessment of IT risks, right? All these, gentlemen, would actually make up your IPPF framework. So these are the elements that I'm going to be discussing with you in this discussion. Without further ado, the IPPF framework can be actually subdivided into 2 groups. So there's a group which is mandatory, or the elements which are mandatory under the IPPF, and then there's those which are strongly recommended also within the IPPF framework list of elements. So those which are mandatory, gentlemen, would include, okay, before I actually begin to give you that breakdown, when you're saying something is mandatory, very important, it means that there is a requirement of compliance from your side to comply with such mandatory guidance that has been set in place to govern your professional conduct as an internal auditor. So you're going to see it, especially when I begin to talk about, for example, the IPPF standards. So when you're performing or conducting internal audit activities, you need to perform these internal audit activities in line with the standards. All right. So it will make more sense, of course, when I get to discuss about them. Then if something is strongly recommended, it just simply means that it's something that is endorsed by the Institute of Internal Auditors. All right. It's not to say that this is really mandated, but it's just something that they endorse to say, okay, well, you can also follow this guideline when you're performing your internal audit service activities. Then without further ado, let's look at the breakdown of the IPPF framework so that we can disseminate between those elements which are mandatory and those that are strongly recommended. So you'd observe on the diagram that is showing on your screen. Just confirm if you can see the screen, guys, or from your side. Is it clear? Pardon me?
Yeah, it's clear. Yes, it's clear.
Okay. The volume is a bit faint. I don't know whether it's my side, but the volume, okay, my volume is okay. All right. So look at this, gentlemen. When you're looking at the IPPF framework, it is classified into two, or rather subdivided into two sets of elements. So there's what we call mandatory guidance. And then there's what we call recommended guidance. So the ones that you see, of course, within this dark bluish color, the mandatory guidance would include, for example, the core principles of internal auditing, the definition of internal auditing, the IPPF standards, as well as the Code of Ethics. In the exam, they love to test a lot about the IPPF standards coupled together with the Code of Ethics. That's what they like to test. And if ever they bring the question with MCQs, meaning to say multiple choice, you can expect something to test you along the lines of this framework, by the way. And then those which are strongly recommended, or what you call simply recommended guidance, would include the implementation guidance and the supplemental guidance. Now I'm going to give you, these are separate documents from your standards, because especially this guidance, like for example, the implementation guidance, they elaborate further on the content of the IPPF standards. So when you look at it, it gives you details to say, for example, if I'm looking at attribute standard 1000, which deals with the purpose, the responsibility of an internal auditor, you would observe that when you look into the implementation guidance, it will give you more details now, other than just what you would look at when you observe in the IPPF standards. So this is just basically to show you, or to reflect just the breakdown between mandatory guidance and the implementation guidance within the IPPF framework. And very important, gentlemen, you need to ensure that when you are performing your audit activities, you always maintain the mission of internal auditing, which I'll discuss with you as we move along. Now, again, I can also break down the same classification of the elements into two, like in this tabular format. So it's just more or less one in the same thing as what you're seeing over here. It's just that I just showed it in a different view. Then now let's look at the mission of internal auditing. What exactly is the mission of internal auditing? What do they intend to achieve? All right. So the mission of internal auditing is to enhance and to protect organizational value by providing a risk-based and objective assurance, advice, and insight. Now, this mission statement is not the same thing as the definition of internal auditing, because you're going to see some of these familiar words when you go through the definition of internal auditing. But this mission statement, it is something separate from the definition of internal auditing. The mission is simply to say, what do we, what is our core purpose as internal auditors? What is it that we intend to achieve through our service offering to our clients? So this is what we intend to achieve by enhancing and protecting organizational value. How do we do this? By providing a risk-based, objective assurance, advice, and insight. Notice there's assurance, advice, and then of course insight. There's a difference, or there's a thin line between assurance and an advice. If I'm giving somebody assurance, in actual sense, it means I'm actually performing an actual audit engagement. But if I'm performing, if I'm just giving someone an advice, I'm talking in the professional sense of me being an internal auditor and somebody just comes for advice within the organization, maybe it's a manager. Now that is a separate thing from me giving that person assurance. So advice in other sense, it simply means consulting services, okay? So you'll see that even when you go through the definition of internal auditing, which is what I'm now showing you in the next slideshow. So the definition of internal auditing will be the first element of the IPPF framework that I'll just take you guys through. Now, this you just need to know, like I said, for MCQ questions, most probably. So the definition of internal auditing can be defined as follows. It's basically an independent, objective assurance and consulting activity. I just want you to mark those two words right there. Right. There is a reason why I'm marking those two words, because there's a difference between an assurance activity and a consulting activity. All right. There's a difference between the two. So sometimes in the assignment, they can just ask you to distinguish between assurance and consulting activity. So I'm just going to give you guys a hint over there to say you should be able to distinguish between assurance and consulting services, like that. You should be able to distinguish between the two. And then, so basically, the definition of internal auditing is an independent, objective assurance or consulting activity that is designed to add value and to improve an organization's operations, full stop. Now, how do we help and improve the organization's operations? Through helping them to accomplish their objectives. How do we do this? By applying what we call a system or systematic disciplined approach to evaluate and to improve the effectiveness of three important things, which I want you to highlight. Number one, risk management. Number two, control assessment. And number three, governance processes. Very important. So internal auditors, their duty according to the definition of internal auditing, we are addressing these three things when we are looking at an organization. So we are dealing with the issue concerning risk. How is the organization managing its risk appetite? Number two, how is the organization's controls functioning or helping management to achieve their intended objectives within a particular process activity that is being conducted within the organization. And then number three, proceed, right? So I was explaining about the three important areas that internal auditors address when they are performing their assurance services or consulting activities. They are always dealing with risk management in the company, control activities within the company, as well as the governance processes of the organization. Those are the areas where internal auditors participate. Okay, great stuff, Mr. Nkosi. I can see your message now. Right. So now I want you to observe something very critical from here. Gentlemen, you would observe when you are performing risk management, you need to have a good knowledge of what is known as enterprise risk management, which is ERM, right? For you to perform an effective risk management activity, you need to have an understanding of the ERM process. I'll talk about it later. For now, it's not really as important for you to note. Then number two, when you're looking at controls within an organization, now controls, it's important to understand that controls are applied in a particular environment. So you need to have a good understanding of the control environment of the organization in concern. Now, when I'm talking about the control environment, I'm talking about the different departments or the different process activities, which could be, for example, revenue and receipt cycle. Number two, acquisitions and payments cycle. There's personnel and payroll cycle, inventory and production cycle. Then there's bank and finance cycle. I hope I did not omit anything here, but very important, controls deployed in different departments or rather in different process activities. So it can be either revenue and receipt cycle that is taking place. Normally you see this obviously from procurement, from sales, the sales department. And in the acquisitions and payment cycle, normally this one, it's a process activity that is executed by procurement of the organization. Then personnel and payroll cycle, this is more to do with HR within the organization. Some organizations, obviously depending on the size, you've discovered that they've got a personnel department and then they've got a payroll department separate from each other. So one is dealing with just people, the other one is dealing with payments of the salaries for the people, right? So and that's payroll. Then there's what is known as inventory and production cycle. Inventory and production cycle, you'd find this particular process activity a lot where there is manufacturing of a product from scratch. So you need to have, for example, procurement of raw materials. Then you take the goods through what you call work in progress or work in process until you have the finished goods. So in the inventory and production cycle, there are other cycles that you actually find within them, within that same cycle, which is, of course, when you start buying the raw materials, what are you deploying? You are deploying acquisitions and payment cycle. Then when you have the raw materials, you have to manufacture the product so that we can be able to get it to its usable state. So in the process of actually taking it through the production process, it will go through a state called work in progress. From work in progress, then you have a finished good at the end. And when you have the finished good, the end result is just to sell the end product to the user. And that is where revenue and receipt cycle comes back into the picture. So when you're looking at inventory and production cycle, very important. This is a I would rather say it complements others business cycles as well. So when you're talking about internal auditors evaluating and improving the effectiveness of control, we are talking about the control activities that are deployed in these process activities in the various departments of the organization. So it's very, very, very important to have a good background, especially about these things. But you needed this one a lot, especially when you're looking at AUI 4863. You need that a lot in AUI 4863, right? Okay, just a second, gentlemen. My boss, let's continue. Right. So I think I've explained about just a bit concerning control and then governance process now. Governance process, this is where, like what I was showing you yesterday in AUI 4862, King 4 report is handy. King 4 report is very important. You're also going to be looking at the MFMA, the PFMA Act. All these are vital for this module. The MFMA Act, the PFMA Act as well, and the King 4 report. So you need them for the purposes of being able to perform the governance concept. Now, that was the definition of internal auditing, but at the same time, I was already beginning to give you insight of things that you're going to be doing as we progress further with the module, right? So that is one of the other elements within the IPPF framework. I'm pretty sure this is something you should be familiar with. Now, like I said in the exam or normally in the assignment setup, it is normally tested as an MCQ question, not so much to be worried about really, but it's just something you need to know for MCQ purposes. Then there's IIA Code of Ethics. Now with the IIA Code of Ethics, gentlemen, this is one of the most important topics that you'll see even in the exam. So with the IIA Code of Ethics, they actually bring it in the exam as well. So, all right, let me just explain it as it is here so that I don't confuse you. So with the IIA Code of Ethics, two important elements that you really need to remember. I know these are things you should already know by like from your undergraduate degree level, but we're just doing a recap on it anyways, because it's part of the topics in this module. So two essential elements you find under the IIA Code of Ethics. There's the principles of the code. That's number one. And number two, there's the rules of conduct for each principle, right? Very important. So the principles, they really deal with what is expected to be followed by the auditor, the internal auditor, as they are performing their internal audit assignments. And the rules of conduct is the specificities of the principles now that has to be observed in the process of performing our internal audit responsibilities or in assignments in that case. So it's very, very important to know the principles and the rules of conduct. So there's a way that Dr. Plant used to summarize it for us. So she would actually summarize it in this way. And this way, it makes it easier to remember the principles. So it's always when you've got a face of a human being with two eyes, a nose, and then a mouth. Now, the two eyes, the first eye simply represents competency. The second eye represents confidentiality. The nose over there represents integrity. It represents integrity, whereas the mouth, on the other hand, simply represents objectivity. Objectivity, like that. So this I would call number one, number two, number three, number four, giving us at least 4 important principles of the Code of Ethics. Number one, confidentiality. Number two, integrity, competency, and then objectivity. I'll explain all 4 of them together with their rules of conduct in the slideshow, right? Is there anybody who is not familiar with what I'm showing you now on the screen, gentlemen? Are we all familiar with what I'm showing on the screen?
Yes, I am.
Sorry?
I'm familiar, yes.
Oh, okay, okay. That's wonderful. So this is just a good refresher, if I would put it in that way, because from undergraduate degree level, these are things that you are expected to have done, okay? And then now, just to show you some
can you guys hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. We're not hearing you, Mr. Nkos. But now we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Now we can hear you, yes.
All right. No, I was just saying, Privilege, that I'm aware of these principles, but I didn't do internal auditing at undergrad. I did become accounting.
Oh, you didn't do internal auditing at all?
Yes. So I'm used to external auditing.
Oh, okay. No. I see it. No, then that's fine. I think let me not then assume that everybody knows what I'm showing them now.
All right, please don't.
Yeah, because my assumption is everybody here has done internal auditing. So these are things that you're already familiar with from internal auditing undergraduate level.
Yeah,
But since
because from a principal perspective, it's quite similar to external auditing, but all the other elements are quite new because they weren't covered at undergrad.
Oh, okay. No,
Yes,
which is noted, my leader. I think let me just make sure that we started in the sense of saying we are beginning from the very foundation rather, so that we can be able to benefit fully from what I'm showing you now, right?
All right.
Try to see if I can close my window. I think another reason why there's a lot of noise outside. Right. So 4 important principles, gentlemen. I'm just gonna quickly explain them. So the first one is integrity, which is really based on number one, establishment of trust and reliance of professional judgment of the internal auditor. So the internal audit has to establish a certain degree of trust with the engagement client or with their employer, because internal auditors normally they can actually be employed as employees for an organization. So there will be a department specifically for that, right? So we need to maintain integrity. We should be people that can be trusted and people that, if somebody's to use our information, they can rely on our professional judgment. That is integrity by definition. Then the second important principle is called objectivity. Now, with objectivity, we need to maintain a high level of objectivity in the sense of how we gather information, how we evaluate the information that we've gathered, and obviously how we also convey the information to interested parties. So when you're looking at objectivity, it is something that we must maintain through all those steps that I've mentioned: gathering, evaluation, and communication of the information that has been gathered. So how do we do that? Number one, by ensuring that we have no conflict of interest in as far as our engagement with the client is concerned. And number two, by ensuring that our professional judgment is not unduly influenced. In other words, we are not put in a state where we have to be biased concerning the professional judgment that we are going to give. That is objectivity. So very important, an audit has to be objective from the very beginning of the audit assignment all the way up until the engagement is completed. So it's important, even through the process of gathering the information, evaluating the information, and even communicating that information to interested parties, we must be objective throughout. So there are things that you're going to discover that will make an auditor to be not objective. Same thing with integrity, that would reflect that this auditor is not trustworthy. And then number three, confidentiality. Confidentiality just deals with protection of information that is gathered in the process of conducting an audit engagement. So we need to be prudent with every detail that we collect through our audit engagement. Very, very important. So in simple terms, confidentiality deals with information and how we handle the information in our hands. Then competency. Competency, it deals with now three important things, which is to be maintained and also to ensure that the auditor or continually applies these in the process of conducting the audit engagement. So one of the three is to do with the knowledge kit. So the internal auditor has to have the knowledge for the audit assignment that they're going to be assigned to perform. They need to be skilled in the subject area that they're going to be performing an audit assignment on. And number three, they should only be in a state to accept audit assignments that they have the relevant experience on. So very important, we're not talking of competency, we are talking about, we are really talking about the skill set, the knowledge set, and the experience requirement. Very, very important. So these are your 4 important principles of the IIA Code of Ethics. Now we're going to look into the rules of conduct of each one of these 4 outlined principles. So the first one we're going to look at is integrity principle and the respective rules of conduct that follows. So under integrity, there are 4 important rules of conduct. Please pay attention to these ones. Number 1, remember, when the moment you hear the word integrity of an internal auditor, you're thinking about, can this auditor be trusted? Can we rely on the professional judgment of this auditor? That's what should come into your mind when you're thinking of the definition. Then obviously, what are the rules that would suggest that an auditor has a certain degree of integrity? Number 1, internal auditors shall perform their work with honesty, due diligence, and responsibility. They shall observe the law and make the necessary disclosures expected by the law and as well as the profession of internal auditing. Now, when they're saying observe the law, now it means you should refrain from engaging in anything that could be considered illegal activity. And that follows to the next, 3rd rule of conduct, which says internal auditors shall not knowingly be a part of any illegal activity or engage in acts that are discreditable to the audit profession, in this case, the internal auditing, or to the organization. We cannot be found participating in illegal activities as we are performing our audit assignments. Number 4, we shall respect and contribute to the legitimate and ethical objectives of the organization. Now, these 4 important principles are important. And how are these things tested when you look at it let's say, for example, in an assignment setup or in an exam setup? Here's what they would do, so that I just give you insight. So when they ask you guys on the application of IPPF, and this applies not only to the code of ethics that I'm showing you, but it applies to almost everything in the IPPF. Number 1, they would ask you to identify a violation of the IPPF element, or rather IPPF framework. Yeah, element. So you need to state which element it is. So if it is the Code of Ethics principle of integrity, you state there is a violation of the IIA Code of Ethics principle of integrity, and you also mention the rules of conduct. That's what you do. So you first identify the violation, and by saying you're identifying the violation, there are 2 ways of addressing that. So you would state yes, there is. So to be yes or no violation, that's number 1. And then obviously, if you said yes, there is a violation, then you state the violated element of the IPPF framework. Then obviously, then the last, not the last, but the other aspect that you would also address in answering this question, and it will be to justify, or in other words, give reason why you say there's a violation. Okay. So it's normally tested in 3. So first of all, there's a column where like it will be like some sort of a table that you can be responding to, which looks like this. Let me take you to the whiteboard just so that you can see. By the way, it's not to say that it will be standardized that you answer like that, but this is something you can do, and it's always, I think it will make your work to look smart. So it will be like that. So in one column, sorry about that. So in one column, you're stating the violation, whether there's a violation. So here it will be a yes or no response, okay? Yes or no answer. So normally, if it's a yes, you say the yes, okay? So let's do that. Okay. Right, so if there's a violation, you would state that yes, there's a violation, and you caught the IPPF element that has been violated. So maybe if it's the code of ethics, then here you say code of ethics principle integrity, for example. All right, and then on the other column, which is the last one, this is now where you give your reason. All right, and when you're giving the reason, I need to emphasize this. Your reason is always based on detail in the case study. It's always based on the detail in the case study. So for example, if there's a violation of integrity, then the reason could be to say the internal auditor did not make all disclosures as required in terms of the law. Why? Because he was promised a performance bonus by the CEO for non-disclosure. So that could be a typical example of a reason that you would maybe have observed in a case study scenario that you may be given in the exam. So you can respond to this question on the code or any of the elements of the IPPF framework by drawing a table like this. I always find it very much smooth and easier to flow when I draft it like this. So I'm going to show you, obviously, when we do practical questions to this, how you go about doing it. So coming back to our slideshow, because I want to make sure today I'm done with IPPF Code of Ethics. I will talk about the standards on Saturday. So there's integrity, and I've explained it. Then the next principle and the rules of conduct is pertaining to objectivity. Objectivity has got three important rules of conduct. The first one suggesting that internal auditors should not be found participating in any form of activity or a relationship that can impair or presume to be impairing their unbiased assessment. So very important, a relationship that an internal auditor has maybe with a particular individual in the client premises could actually end up what I would say compromising the objectivity of that auditor. So very important, we are not to be found participating in an audit assignment or in any form of relations with the engagement client that would impair our unbiased assessment or our unbiased professional judgment. Number two, we shall not accept anything in form of gifts that can be presumed to impair our professional judgment. So when they're saying anything, they're simply referring to gifts which have got a monetary value. We are not supposed to accept gifts with significant monetary values. Now it's different with, for example, that you have audited the department, and then they just say, you know what, let's just give you breakfast, or let's just give you lunch. Now that's not something that can really end up maybe compromising your objectivity just because they bought you lunch. See. Then number three, shall disclose all material facts known to them. Very important. So if you find something fishy, you must report it. You must report it in your audit working papers. Then number three, we deal with confidentiality. Just as got three important rules of conduct. The first one being that we shall, sorry, this is competency, not confidentiality. So competence, like I told you, three important elements you would see: skills, knowledge, experience. So we are only expected, according to the first rule of conduct, to participate in audit assignments to which we have got the relevant knowledge, skill set, and experience level. That's number one. Number two, we are to perform the audit assignments that has been assigned to us in line with the IPPF standards. That's rule of conduct number two. Then last one, we are expected to continually improve our proficiency. Now, when they're saying proficiency, they're referring to those three things: knowledge, skill, and experience. So your proficiency as an auditor has to be improved on a continued basis. All right. It's very, very important. So for example, if I look at a case study scenario and I'm told that the chief audit executive last did a staff training for the internal audit members about 5 years ago, and he does not see it being necessary for the training to be done annually, I can actually assure you that in that scenario like that, it follows that there's a violation of this particular principle with regards to rule number 3, which is suggesting that internal auditors shall continually improve their proficiency and the effectiveness of the quality of their services. So if there's no continued professional development happening in the internal audit department, then we have a problem. We are not complying with competency principle. Then the last one, sorry, yeah, I think I skipped confidentiality. Confidentiality has got 3 important principles, two important rules of conduct. So with confidentiality, the first one is that internal auditors are expected to be prudent with the use and the protection of information which they've gathered in the course of performing their audit duties. And very important, we are not allowed to use the information for personal gain or in any manner that is not in line with the law. So in other words, for example, you have confidential information in your hands. Now, you can only disclose such information, normally it's always disclosed to any other party if it is by a court order or in the court of law. That's the only way that such confidential information can be disclosed to another party other than the ones interested within the audit assignment. So that is all to do with the IIA Code of Ethics. Then just to talk about standards, and because I just want to make sure that I give you an intro to it. So when you're talking of the standards, guys, IPPF standards, all they simply do, these standards, they delineate basic principles that represent the practice of internal auditing. So you're going to see 3 types of standards. There is what we call attribute standards. Attribute standards, they deal with the auditor and the work that the auditor does. That's attribute standards. Then there's something called performance standards. Performance standard, it really has to do with the audit process and what is supposed to be done when the audit engagement is actually being performed. So it gives you, for example, what should happen before planning. So we call that pre-engagement audit activities. Then we've got planning. Then we've got performing of the audit engagement. And then we've got reporting and monitoring, which is the last step rather within your audit process. So there are standards governing each one of those steps, okay, and governing each and every activity that takes place within each one of those steps. I'm going to share that in detail when we get into our class on Saturday, but just to help you to understand, like I said, it's structured into 3. There's attribute standards dealing with just the auditor as a person and the work that the auditor does. And then number 2, performance standards, they really deal with the actual work itself and the process of the audit engagement performed by the auditor. Now there's the 3rd one, it's called implementation guides. No, actually it's called implementation standards. Now implementation standards, they elaborate further on what attribute standards really are. And similarly, they also elaborate in detail what could be represented by the performance standards. So that's what you see with implementation guidance. There's a separate document I'm going to share with you guys, which reflects on the implementation guidance and obviously the actual IPPF standards on the separate note or separate side as well. So I'm going to talk about these on on Saturday. But anyways, like I said, the performance, the IPPF standards, it's broken down into two. So the first group is called attribute standards. We call these ones the 1000 series. Performance standards, we call it the 2000 series. So like I said, if you look on the attribute standards, all you're simply dealing with, they are dealing with the auditor and the work they do. So the purpose, authority, and responsibility of internal auditors, that's standard 1000. Independence and objectivity of internal auditors, again, that's the person. Proficiency and professional due care, again, that's addressing the individual auditor. Then number 1300, quality assurance and improvement program. This is to do with the auditor and the internal audit activity. Then the performance standards. Now we're looking at the 2000 series. Like I said, these ones, guys, they are really dealing in detail with the work in detail, the detailed work that the auditor would be performing, as well as the process itself. So like I said, you see standard 2200 dealing with engagement planning. You really need to know what happens during the planning phase of the audit. And same thing, 2300 deals with performing of the audit engagement. 2400 deals with communicating of the results that has been observed or gathered during the audit process. And then lastly, 2500 deals with the monitoring. So after you've communicated the information that is to be perhaps considered by management for improvement's sake, you would then go a step further to monitor or to review whether they've actually implemented what you've recommended, right? So that is something that normally happens after you have communicated the audit result. And then standard 2600, communicating the acceptance of risk. So gentlemen, I'm going to pick it up from here where I begin to then show you some bit of detail on the standard, and we'll do a practical question this coming Saturday with regards to this teaching. So at this point, I'm willing to take any questions and clarifications that you guys may have. Any questions? Any questions, gentlemen?
Yeah, on my side, I was wondering, leadership, when we should expect the slides.
Pardon me?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
now
we
I
can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering when we should expect the slides.
Oh, the slideshows. Oh, no problem. I'm going to share it definitely at the end of this class. I'm going to share it immediately at the end of this class.
Carry on, Gus.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
No, I was wondering if maybe we can get the slides for today's session and yesterday's.
Yes, no, most definitely. I'm gonna send them just immediately after this class.
Sorry,
I'm definitely gonna forward them to you via email. I think I've already sent you.
Can
also
you please repeat
links,
that?
On email for the other sessions that we did, like the official session that we did for 4862. I think I shared it via email. I don't know if you guys have received the link to YouTube. Gentlemen, can you hear me?
Those slides.
Hello?